Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. I'm from KOICA, and it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to today's conference. Marking its 14th year, Seoul ODA International Conference has been a pioneering platform in the field of development cooperation in Korea. The theme of this year's conference is Building Back Better through Knowledge Exchange towards resilient, green, and inclusive development. Today, we are going to discuss ways to build more resilient health system, achieve green recovery, and create more inclusive digital future. We are holding this conference online this year, and I would like to extend my gratitude to everyone, including speakers in the room, and also online audience for taking time to join us here today. There are various events going on during the conference, so we look forward to your active participation. Now, let us begin the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference with opening remarks by Dr. Son Hyuk-sang, President of Korea International Cooperation Agency.
Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. I extend my sincerest gratitude to all speakers and participants joining us today, both virtually and in person. My heartfelt appreciation goes out to the many people who have shared video messages and will join us for the various discussions. Especially, I'd like to thank Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Choi Jong-mun and also today's panelists who are all leaders of esteemed international organizations and renowned experts. We have invited WHO Director General Gabriel Jesus and UNICEF Executive Director Ford to give today's congratulatory remarks. WHO and UNICEF are battling COVID-19 on the front lines, taking the lead on procuring vaccines for developing countries through COVAX. These two organizations, which are working closely with the governments in Korea and elsewhere, prove that international organizations can play a key role in coping with the global crisis. It was once again proven. We are honored that OECD DAC Chair Susanna Moorhead will be gracing us as our keynote speaker. The DAC has been once again a royal and generous partner to Korea throughout our historic transition from an aid recipient to one of the most trusted aid donors in the world. This year, as the DAC marks its 60th anniversary, we are looking forward to fostering even closer cooperation between member states and making tremendous progress on key issues, especially as a result of Chair Moorhead's leadership. Thank you again for sacrificing your time and for reorganizing your busy schedule to join us for today's conference. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently facing an unprecedented global challenges, the COVID-19 crisis. Thanks to the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines at the end of last year, many of us felt hopeful that we'll return to our normal lives. However, these hopes were crushed in a flash as the Delta variant emerged. This, along with the vaccine inequality and weak health infrastructure, put the world on the verge of another crisis. To make matters worse, COVID-19 has ransacked developing countries. In July, the World Bank reported that developed countries would reach growth rates higher than projected at the beginning of the year, while emerging markets and developing economies are forecast to grow less than initially projected. As the theme of today's conference suggests, building back better through knowledge exchange towards the resilient, green, and inclusive development. We must be brave enough to forge a new future rather than simply fearing or passively reacting to the pandemic. This year, global leaders have echoed the slogan of Building Back Better to express their determination to defeat COVID-19 and design an improved post-COVID-19 world. One example of this was G7 summit attended by South Korean President Moon Jae-in, resilient, green, and inclusive development. The three key words for today's discussion, resilient, green, and inclusive development, will resonate with many of us. Resilient development comes first because the crisis we are facing is not an isolated event and simple solutions do not exist. And as we move forward into the unknown future, we'll face even more complex crises. Therefore, our response measures must also be complex and versatile. The causes of rapid COVID-19 spread are varied, from climate crisis and environmental destructions to poor healthcare system. At the same time, the impacts of COVID-19 are compounded by poor health, poverty, poor education, and gender discrimination. Therefore, to overcome COVID-19 and prepare for future pandemics, we must develop highly integrated response measures that work in harmony to solve problems across various fields, including healthcare. This is the best way to avoid an uneven recovery. In other words, this is how we will achieve a resilient recovery. Starting from this year, KOICA has emphasized an integrated approach. Based on this perspective, we can no longer deal with the environmental changes and challenges of development cooperation by taking a siloed approach. Many of the challenges we face today are complex. Therefore, our response must be comprehensive, holistic, and also more integrated. The second issue that will be addressed during today's conference is green. This pandemic clearly demonstrates that underprivileged and less developed countries are hit hardest by the climate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, climate change is indifferent to how developed a country is. This year, the world witnessed a series of natural disasters, from massive floods that swept through Germany, Japan, China, destroying lives and ecosystem, to blazing, uncontrollable wildfires in Greece, Turkey, and the United States. The environmental crisis does not discriminate between the rich and the poor, and it poses a monumental threat to all life forms across the earth. It is time for humanity to unite and take action. Efforts by countries to reduce carbon emissions are evolving rapidly, as evidenced by South Korea's Green New Deal announced last year and the EU's Fit for 55 program. Just as P4G Seoul Summit encouraged climate actions on a global scale in May of this year, COP26 in Glasgow is expected to recapture the attentions of the international community this November. We must remember that in addition to reducing carbon emissions from the largest emitters, it is crucial that international community to work together to help developing countries embark on their own path toward carbon reduction. As developing countries were the first to enjoy the benefit of industrialization, they have been first to acquire strategies for carbon reductions. Developed countries must give back to the planet by helping developing countries participate in global carbon reduction through knowledge and exchange and development cooperation projects. This is our moral duty and responsibility. In addition to green, another key element of resilient recovery is digital transformation. This is the third issue that will be covered by today's conference. Digital transformation is both opportunity and challenge. With the rapid expansions of online activities due to COVID-19, the discussion on digital transformation has come to forefront. Digital and cultural development that would have been introduced gradually under normal circumstances were adopted and implemented in just 1 year. School shutdowns and resulting transitions to remote learning exemplify such unprecedented rapid response. However, the OECD reported that only 56% of surveyed countries had proper access to internet, TV, cell phones, radio, and other tools required for remote learning. Countries lacking digital infrastructure are likely to be excluded from the digital transformation. Digital transformation can be a crucial stepping stone on the path to development for emerging economies, but it can also be a stumbling block that exacerbates inequality. Therefore, Only when we can achieve an inclusive digital transformation can we move toward a resilient recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, I have briefly touched on 3 issues that will be discussed during today's conference: resilience, green, and digital. I will now discuss knowledge exchange, which is an approach that will help us advance in all 3 of these areas. Korea has perhaps benefited more from knowledge exchange than any other country due to its inspiring journey from an aid recipient to aid donor. Even after becoming a major donor, the Korean government has shared various development experiences, such as Saemaul Undong, with developing countries through DIP. These programs demonstrate how Korea understands the need for and importance of knowledge exchange. Today, in the field of international development cooperation, knowledge no longer flows one way from developed to developing countries or from the north to the south. We are living in a time when the movement of knowledge and funds alone cannot solve the development issues we face. As I mentioned earlier, the problems facing humanity are incredibly complex. This is why co-constructions and collective actions are instrumental, and why the global north and global south must work together to solve these issues. The Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, "To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge." He also said, "When I walk along with 2 others, from at least one I will be able to learn." These quotes teach the importance of mutual learning, and we must share this message. If you do not know something, there is someone out there who can share that knowledge with you. This is horizontal learning. I believe that the attitude and virtues of mutual learning are keys to identifying numerous development cooperation challenges and finding solutions. Rather than donors simply passing along information to recipients, I hope that development partners can stand shoulder to shoulder and, through joint efforts and communication, addresses issues such as the climate crisis, peace, and inequality. I hope that today's conference provides a meaningful forum to discuss our 3 topics: resilience, green, and digital, and I hope that it fosters an active discussions on exciting and productive approaches to knowledge exchange. It is now time for me to conclude. The Korean government founded KOICA in 1991 with the goal of contributing to the international community. Celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, KOICA's many achievements were only possible thanks to solidarity and cooperation with various partners, and knowledge exchange was at the heart of that cooperation. Throughout history, the uncertainty and crisis the humanity has faced has not been easy to overcome. However, through solidarity and cooperation, we have turned those crises into opportunities and continue to evolve. If we join forces, I believe we can deal with the looming COVID-19 crisis as well as a future infectious disease, the climate crisis, and the digital divide. I look forward to the meaningful presentations and discussion that will happen here today at the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. And I hope that today's conference will contribute to a future of dynamic international development cooperation beyond COVID-19 and into the post-COVID-19 era. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the remarks. Next, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Choi Jong-moon, Second Vice Minister at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for his welcoming remarks. Please welcome him with big applause.
Dr. Son Hyuk-sang, President of the KOICA, Dr. Susanna Moorhead, Chair of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of WHO, and Ms. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome all of you to the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. Indeed, this year marks a meaningful milestone. 30 years ago, the Republic of Korea joined the United Nations. In the same year, we established KOICA, demonstrating our deep wish and determination to give back to the international community in return for what we have received. Since then, we have been striving to deliver quality development assistance to partner countries, drawing upon our own experience. Distinguished guests, our world has changed profoundly since the last conference 2 years ago. COVID-19 has taken a tragic toll on humanity, with more than 4.5 million lives lost. With the rise of multiple variants, the crisis is far from over. Never has it been more important for all of us to bring the pandemic to an end and build a more inclusive, sustainable future. Of particular importance at this time is strengthening multilateral mechanisms to ensure equitable access to vaccine for all. Equally important is to invest in bolstering global and national health systems to better prepare for future pandemics. Second, there is an urgent need to take climate action. In this process, we should also reach out our helping hands to developing countries to enable them to better mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Thirdly, harnessing digital technology is key to facilitate a resilient recovery and to cope with the widening digital divide as a result of the pandemic. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, Korea, in its development assistance, has placed a greater focus on helping partners to respond to the pandemic. Under the Building Trust ODA initiative, we are providing health assistance to over 120 countries to ensure equitable supply of vaccines to developing countries. Korea has pledged to provide $200 million to the COVAX AMC. In line with the Korea New Deal, we are also providing assistance to partner countries to accelerate their green and digital transition as part of recovery and growth efforts. Together with our commitment to net zero carbon emission by 2050 and to end financing for all coal-fired projects, we will significantly increase our climate and green-related development assistance in the coming years. Moreover, Korea will expand our cooperation for building digital infrastructure and institutions such as e-government, e-education, smart farming, and improving digital access for vulnerable groups. Distinguished guests, the pooling of resources and knowledge is key in overcoming crises. Building multi-stakeholder partnerships spanning member states, the private sector, international and regional organizations, and civil society is imperative to this end. Recognizing this, Korea very much hopes to play a meaningful part in further enhancing the effectiveness of various forms of development cooperation through the hosting of the 6th Busan Global Partnership Forum this November in Seoul. With that, thank you so much once again for being here, and I look forward to enlightening discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for the remarks. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General at World Health Organization, for his congratulatory remarks.
Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, it's an honor to be invited to say a few words to you today. I congratulate the Korean International Cooperation Agency on its 30th anniversary. WHO welcomes your leadership and that of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in addressing the biggest health challenges of our time, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Official development assistance is a key instrument in supporting countries to manage crisis and a vital tool for fostering resilience and recovery. To protect us from future epidemics and pandemics, we must invest in health systems that enable multi-sectoral preparedness and response. Investment is especially needed in three critical areas: research and development for surveillance and detection, a One Health approach addressing the risks from the intersection of humans, animals, and the environment, and strengthening public health, primary care, and health systems. There is no global health security without local health security. In November, a special session of the World Health Assembly will consider developing a convention, agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. The Republic of Korea has long been a strong partner of WHO and a global health leader, and we appreciate your support for this critical initiative. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Kamsahamnida. I thank you.
For next congratulatory remarks, let me introduce Ms. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director at UNICEF.
안녕하십니까. Thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and the Korea International Cooperation Agency for the invitation to the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. Special thanks to the President of KOICA, Dr. Son, and Vice Minister Jung Moon Choi. This September marks 30 years of the Republic of Korea's accession to the UN, and this year marks 30 years since KOICA was established. Both events were significant milestones in this country's emergence as a critical donor and partner in international development and humanitarian action. On behalf of UNICEF, I would like to express our deep gratitude to the people and the government of the Republic of Korea for their continued support of UNICEF and our essential programs for children around the world. This is a difficult time for the world's children. The COVID-19 pandemic and other crises are combining to deprive children of their health and well-being. They are confronted with an array of incredible challenges: the mounting consequences of climate change, economic instability and poverty, conflict, discrimination, and limited access to essential services and learning opportunities. At UNICEF, the scope of our work for children and young people reflects the diversity of these challenges. Across the globe, UNICEF is on the ground working to reach every child, even those living in the hardest to reach places, with the services and the support they need. Together with our partners, we are delivering immunizations, healthcare, clean water and sanitation, and nutrition. We are providing education and protection, and we are always working to gain access to the most vulnerable children. Our work in the health sector remains focused on maternal and child survival, strengthening health systems, and health in humanitarian settings. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, UNICEF had to quickly adapt to meeting the mounting needs of children and families, and we have taken a key leadership role in the global pandemic response. From the rapid delivery of tests, supplies, and protective equipment to communities, to equipping and training healthcare workers to deliver the vaccines, and to our central role in COVAX facility, putting our expertise and networks to use, supporting the greatest vaccination distribution drive in history. We have so far shipped more than 236 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines through COVAX to 139 countries. As the world faces the climate crisis, approximately 1 billion children, nearly half the world's children, live in one of 33 countries classified as extremely high risk to the impacts of climate change. And that is why we are prioritizing climate resilience and adaptation strategies in all our development and humanitarian programs. Our efforts are already helping communities to adapt to climate change and mitigate some of its impacts. We have even introduced the Children's Climate Risk Index, the first comprehensive analysis of climate risk from a child's perspective. It ranks countries based on children's exposure to climate and environmental shocks, such as cyclones and heat waves, as well as their vulnerability to these shocks based on their access to essential services. In recent years, UNICEF has worked to harness the power of technology and digital innovation for children. We have leveraged digital technologies to reach communities with critical information to protect against COVID-19, and we have scaled up existing technologies to improve the protection of vulnerable children. And we have streamlined cash transfer mechanisms to ensure that government partners continue to reach children in need despite the global shutdowns. And of course, through our Reimagine Education initiative, we are working to address the global learning crisis and to transform education by giving children and young people equal access to quality digital learning services. This means connecting all of them, some 3.5 billion children and young people by 2030, to world-class digital solutions for learning. UNICEF is ready to build upon our great collaboration with the Government of Korea to continue tackling the most intractable development and humanitarian challenges, including those presented by the pandemic, and to find innovative solutions to jointly achieve the SDGs. Thanks to the Korean government's commitment to UNICEF and the generosity of the Korean people, millions of children around the world have survived and thrived through our combined efforts. This year marks UNICEF's 75th anniversary, and we look forward to our continued partnership with the Republic of Korea to ensure that every child is given a fair chance to develop his or her potential. 감사합니다. Our heartfelt thanks.
Next, I would like to invite Dr. Susanna Moorhead, Chair of Development Assistance Committee at OECD, for her keynote speech.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to address such an important conference at a critical time for developing countries and indeed for official development assistance. I'm really sorry I can't be in Seoul. It was one of the first countries that I visited as chair of the Development Assistance Committee. And at the time, I had the honor of meeting colleagues both in Goika and ministers at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I look forward to making a return visit as soon as circumstances permit. The world continues to struggle to respond effectively and equitably to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's one of the greatest global challenges the world has ever faced. COVID and its aftershocks pushed 120 million people back into poverty in 2020 alone. After decades of progress, our fight against global poverty has sadly been thrust into reverse gear. Demands on public and private resources for development cooperation to support the immediate response to COVID and recovery from it have never been greater. But at difficult times like these, we seek out stories of hope and inspiration. 2021 marks an important milestone both for Korea and for the Development Assistance Committee. The rapid and extraordinary transformation of Korea in the last 70 years has been a remarkable development success story. 25 years ago, Korea joined the OECD, the Club of Advanced Nations, and 11 years ago, Korea became a member of the Development Assistance Committee, the group of the biggest international aid donors. 10 years ago, Korea hosted the historic high-level meeting on aid effectiveness in Busan, which gave rise to the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation, the GPEDC, reflecting Korea's significant and important influence within the DAC from a very early stage. More important still is that Busan reflected Korea's determination to demonstrate that effective development cooperation can work, it can transform lives, and it can bend the arc of history. 2021 is the DAC's 60th anniversary. As one of the first committees to be set up at the OECD, the DAC has built its reputation on some simple but important principles: openness and transparency, sharing best practice as well as learning from our mistakes, using peer reviews to encourage mutual learning and to hold each other to account, providing reliable, comparable statistics and data, and always working in partnership with others, with partner countries, with other donors, with other multilateral organizations, and with civil society. Our efforts to improve the quality and quantity of our official development assistance remain at the very heart of our mission. Yet, despite all we've achieved in the last 60 years, much remains to be done. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed new stresses and strains on all economies and societies, widening inequalities between and within countries. Sadly, as is so often the case, the most vulnerable groups, especially women and girls and those living in fragile and conflict-affected places, have been the very hardest hit. Without urgent action to mitigate impacts, we may see what IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva has called a great divergence, as rich countries with access to vaccines and social safety nets recover rapidly, while poor countries are forced to live with the virus and its consequences for years and years to come. Progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, with its call to leave no one behind and to focus on the furthest behind first, was slow before the pandemic. And as I've said, it is now in reverse. But I believe that the commitments we all made in 2015 are as important as ever, and that the DAC and ODA are needed more than ever to deliver more and more effective development assistance. With less than a decade left to meet the SDGs, the annual financing gap in developing countries, which was $2.5 trillion before the crisis, has increased by at least 50%, driven by falls in tax revenues and trade, remittances, and foreign direct investment. The good news is that DAC members committed to sustain ODA volumes during COVID-19. In 2020, they slightly increased their support for developing countries to a record high of $161 billion. But I remain concerned about what will happen in the years ahead. We must continue to protect and increase ODA and to live up to our commitments. DAC members have responded to the crisis by redirecting existing resources, as well as mobilizing additional funds, and by redoubling their efforts to make every single dollar of ODA work as hard as possible to deliver better development outcomes for poor people. Korea has focused its efforts and resources on strengthening health systems and making diagnostics and vaccines available to countries and people most in need. DAC members have contributed well over 80% of financing for the collaborative ACT accelerator mechanism, of which COVAX is a key part. And Korea is the 20th largest contributor, providing, as we've heard, at least $200 million. Your generosity is very, very welcome and much needed, but we all need to do more to vaccinate the world. And of course, the immediate crisis is only the beginning. Which leads me to the focus of this conference, the challenge of resilient, green, and inclusive development. Let me say a few words about three aspects of this huge but absolutely vital topic. First, on achieving a greener recovery. The pandemic has been an acute crisis, but the climate crisis is the dominant chronic crisis threatening the world and indeed the international development community. Developing countries, as is so often the case, stand to suffer the most severe impacts. Small island developing states are already literally sinking under rising sea levels. Food insecurity is exacerbated by droughts, by floods, and increasing climatic uncertainty. Competition over scarce natural resources, especially water, is fueling conflict and greater vulnerability. The SDGs recognize that climate and the environment and urgent action to halt climate change are integral to development outcomes everywhere. This means that developing countries must be supported to adapt to the harsh consequences of climate change. And if the world is going to arrest climate change, all countries, whether rich or developing, need growth strategies that include plans to transition to net zero. The pace and nature of transitions to sustainability in developing countries will, of course, vary. But we in the DAC recognize that we must support our partners to achieve their own transitions. And that's why I am a strong supporter of the Building Forward Better agenda. We must support developing countries to respond to the immediate challenges of the pandemic, but we must also support them to leapfrog to more sustainable energy pathways and to build their resilience. The window of opportunity is narrow, but we must step through it together. COP26 in Glasgow is just 2 very short months away. Now is the time to step up to our commitments and actions on climate and the environment. There's no time to lose. Second, we all recognize the need to build more resilient health systems, as Dr. Tedros said. While many of us in richer countries are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel of this horrible pandemic, many in developing countries are still in the thick of the crisis and only at the start of what is likely to be a long and painful journey to recovery. Latest estimates suggest that least developed countries and those people living in fragile places are falling way behind in receiving vaccines. Even though nearly 1/4 of the world's population live in fragile places, so far they've only received a very, very tiny proportion of global vaccines. People in developing countries need vaccines just as much as we do. The DAC and the international community as a whole must do all we can to help them have access to vaccinations. They need our cooperation now more than ever. And there is no such thing as a partial end to a global pandemic. Financing global access to vaccines, on which DAC members, including Korea, are leading, will help the world respond to the current pandemic. But it won't help countries respond to the next pandemic or indeed the one after that. For future pandemics and for the health of the world, DAC members need to invest in making health systems stronger. We've learnt the hard way that weak systems cannot cope with big shocks, and that basic primary healthcare suffers during pandemics, as was so clear in West Africa during the Ebola crisis and has been during this one. Strong systems keep people healthy and underpin resilience to future shocks. They really matter. DAC members and partners need to deliver support to tackle COVID-19 in ways that protect and reinforce existing health priorities and don't simply divert attention and resources elsewhere. The DAC's culture of lesson learning and knowledge exchange can play a critical role, not just for vaccines and tracing, but also to strengthen health infrastructure and delivery of health services. We all have a lot to learn from Korea about how to strengthen health systems in developing countries. Korea's engagement with emerging donors through triangular cooperation in the health sector and beyond is a really, really good illustration of the DAC's comparative advantage and the contribution its members make. Resources matter, but they are at their most powerful and transformative when combined with technical and technological knowledge based on experience and evidence. Korea has shown global leadership in providing a bridge between developing countries, the BRICS countries, and OECD member states by instigating the establishment of the G20's development agenda, a legacy that is proving crucial today in driving G20 support for pandemic preparedness and response in developing countries. Lastly, we must create a more inclusive digital future. Korea has again shown global leadership by championing new technologies and digitalization in development. In addition to the transition to net zero, there's a second great shift underway that development cooperation providers must harness to support developing countries, and that is the digital transition. The pandemic has underlined the importance of digital tools in modern economies, enabling quick dispersal of support payments, making remote working, learning, and purchasing possible. but 3.7 billion people do not have access to the internet. Most of these are in rural areas, in the least developed countries, and in small island developing states. It's hard for us to imagine living without modern digital tools that we rely on every day and that make our lives easier, more comfortable, more productive, better informed. It's almost impossible to imagine the pandemic without access to digital technology, or indeed this conference. But many, many poor people are excluded from that technology, the technology that now defines and drives our lives, and that for the most part enhances our lives as well. This is particularly true for women. It's no surprise, sadly, that 234 million fewer women than men are able to use mobile internet, and that the gender gap in internet access is widening in most of the developing world. A more inclusive digital future is integral to effective development. Investing in digital public goods and infrastructure can advance digitalization, increase transparency, improve service delivery, reduce corruption. It can be transformative. But barriers to digital technology are all too familiar: affordability, literacy and skills, gender discrimination, and safety and security. Development policies and practices need to tackle these barriers, as we are used to doing in other sectors. It's not all positive, of course. Connectivity can create new and different threats to national and individual security. Authoritarian regimes can use digital tools to strengthen surveillance, close down space for discussion or dissent, and repress opponents. Like so many things, digitalization needs safeguards and security measures. Much of the work the OECD is doing is relevant and useful to developing countries as they make their digital transition. And we in the DAC need to make sure that we share our expertise and experience freely. Korea's New Deal, launched in 2020, rests on two mutually reinforcing pillars: the Green New Deal and the Digital New Deal, which includes a commitment to expand digital inclusiveness. With its own experience and increasing demand from low and middle income countries to accelerate digital and green transitions, Korea is very well placed to drive a more inclusive digital future for developing countries. Korea has many allies amongst DAC members in pursuing these twin objectives. Let me close my remarks by emphasizing the importance of effective development cooperation, another issue on which Korea has shown exceptional leadership, particularly through championing the GPEDC. Increasing global poverty and sharply rising humanitarian needs mean that resources for development must be made to work harder than ever. The Busan Principles and sustaining and improving our dialogue on effectiveness are therefore more relevant than ever. DAC member responses to COVID-19 have reminded us of the challenges in delivering aid in a coordinated and transparent way, aligning to local priorities, responding to the needs of those furthest behind, and using country systems. These are the essences of the Busan Principles. We were struggling with these issues well before the pandemic and are now committed to redoubling our efforts to work on the basis of the principles. Let me just repeat them: country ownership, results, inclusive partnerships, and transparency and mutual accountability. This is what good development cooperation is based on. Country ownership in particular faces substantial challenges. Different country contexts and complex political relationships make it hard to decide how best to help partner countries and their citizens. Recent events in Afghanistan are an all too stark and tragic example of this. And if these development effectiveness principles are important to partner countries, which we know they are, then governments in partner countries must insist that all donors, not just DAC members, adhere to them. Korea is a critically important voice to encourage the DAC and other development cooperation providers partner country governments, and non-state actors to make the Busan principles the norm and not just choice. The road to the 2022 GPEDC high-level meeting is an opportunity to champion this, and we are doing a huge amount of work in the DAC. A critically important stage on that partnership on that journey is the Busan Partnership Forum at the end of this year, 10 years after the Busan meeting. In our efforts to improve delivery of the 2030 agenda, we cannot take development effectiveness for granted or to take our eye off the ball of improving it. The Korean success story is an example of what effective development looks like and what can be achieved given the right leadership, public and private action, and international support. I'm delighted that today Korea is a vocal member of the DAC. Until recently, the Korean delegate to the DAC was one of my vice chairs, bringing your expertise to bear on development policy. The topics that will be discussed today, green recovery, resilient health, systems, and digitalization, are at the forefront of the DAC's agenda and indeed at making a bigger contribution to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. Those goals matter more than ever, and to deliver them, we must redouble our efforts to be more effective development cooperation providers. I wish you every success in your deliberations, and I'm delighted to be able to present my opening thoughts to your critically important meeting, and I look forward to Korea's continued participation in the DAC and leadership on these key issues in the international development cooperation agenda. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the speech. This will conclude the opening session of the 14th Seoul ODA International Conference. We will take a break before the next session starting at 5:30. Let me remind you that there are various events going on during the conference, so we look forward to your active participation. Thank you.